So let me be clear, the world is changing. A new oil order is rising, and the era of cheap energy is over. Now, just recently, OPEC cut their oil production by 2 million barrels a day, and everyone is freaking out. Yes, prices at the pump will go high energy, inflation is going to stay high, but what a lot of people aren't focusing on is how the world order is changing. Now, inflation is going to stay high for a lot longer, and energy prices are not going to come down. Remember back in 2020 where crude oil crashed all the way down to a bargain? Basement price of 20. Well, we are not going to see that for a very long time, guys. If ever now, OPEC's willingness to cut oil production during this energy crisis tells us two things. One, they are willing to go against the wishes of the United States. And two, they are focused on protecting their self interest and revenue. And we need to understand that oil is a limited resource. Any country with it will naturally want to sell it at a higher price to maximize profit. Doesn't matter if it's Russia, the United States, or Saudi Arabia. And here's the inconvenient truth that the world has forgotten fossil fuel. Still power, the world over 80% of energy comes from oil, gas, and coal. So whoever controls the oil controls the world. Now, you might think that the price of oil is only set by the suppliers like OPEC, and that is true. They can pump more to lower the price, or they can pump less to jack it up. But that's just one part of the equation. There's another way to influence oil prices, and that is to create or destroy demand. And this is where the United States are more. Specifically, the Federal Reserve comes into play now. If OPEC has the power to control oil supply, then the Federal Reserve also has enormous power when it comes to controlling the world's demand for oil. Now, this is a very important concept that we need to understand. You see, the US might be one of the biggest producers of oil in the world, but they have only been net exporters for 2 years, 2020 and 2021. And the total net amount was just 160,000 barrels a day. There is nothing compared to OPEC's 2 million barrels a day of production. Cards? The only way the US can influence the oil price today is by creating or destroying demand. And the weapon of choice is interest rates. The Federal Reserve is controlling the demand for oil by increasing or decreasing interest rates. We need to remember this. So, since March this year, the Federal Reserve has been doing its best to crush the oil price by hiking rates, and that's the only two they have to fight energy inflation. We all know that. But the big misconception is that the higher rates only affect the American economy now. This is false. Remember, the world relies on the US dollar. Over 70% of global trade is done in US dollars. Commodities, especially they're all priced in the dollar. So if you want to buy oil, you need dollars. So when the US hike rates, two things happens across the world. Firstly, interest rates start to go up, making it harder for people and companies to borrow money, and this causes an economic slowdown and the demand for energy goes down. Second, currencies get devalued against the dollar and importing stuff is expensive. So let's say you hold a British pound, and because of rate hikes, your currency has fallen against the dollar by 20. Now the price of oil for you has increased by 20. Thanks to the currency crash, you now need to pay more British pounds for US dollars before you can buy a barrel of oil. That's even if the price of oil stays the same in dollar terms, and this is another form of demand destruction that's going on across the world. So if you can't flood the markets with your own domestic oil supply, you just kill the demand by hiking rates and cause a global recession. People who will be too broke to buy oil. And that was the old playbook. Now, if we look at the fat funds rate in blue versus the global price of crude oil in rate, we can see every time interest rates go higher, it tends to push down the price of oil because demand can be sustained in such an environment, especially when it causes a recession and when interest rates are near zero. Suddenly, borrowing money is cheaper. Demand improves and the price of oil shoots up. So in essence, the Federal Reserve has the power to influence oil prices because the world is addicted to dollars, and OPEC understands this. And they have finally countered this move by cutting production they are taking to themselves. If the Fed wants to play games with the demand side, we will influence the supply side. Now, the Saudis mentioned how the move was necessary to respond to rising interest rates in the West and a weaker global economy. They know that as rate hikes continue, a global slowdown will happen, especially when winter arrives, and this could cause oil prices to drop. So they have done a preemptive strike to ensure their revenues stay high. And this is a battle between the Federal Reserve, which controls the supply of US dollars, and OPEC, which controls the supply of oil in the world. So now the old world of energy is disappearing, and we need to understand how important that arrangement was for the developed world. Let's take Germany, for example. He has been a developed country for a long time. And if we take a look at its GDP, except for '08 and 2020, growth has been largely positive with a few years hitting near 4%. And this is phenomenal growth, higher than the UN's benchmark of 2%. And how is this possible? This is because Germany was enjoying cheap energy. The entire Eurozone was buying cheap gas from Russia. And according to Zoltan Posa, from Credit Suisse, around 2 trillion of German value dependent on $20 billion of Russian gas. And if we go back in time, we can see that gas to Europe was dirt cheap for well over a decade. Gas prices were under 20 euros per megawatt hour for many years cheap. Energy allowed Europe to grow, then the invasion came and the sanctions came, and now the price of energy has sought reaching 200 euros, 10 times the usual price. And that's why Europe is slipping into a recession. Germany already expects one in 2023 because energy is now extremely expensive. Their industries can grow and consumers are getting squeezed, and we need to prepare for a brave new world where energy prices are not going to come down, and this will affect everything in our lives. We have the head of Singapore Central Bank stating that the era of cheap money, cheap labor, and cheap energy is over. Interest rates are not going to go back to the zero lower bound that we have seen in the last 2 decades. So just imagine a world where oil prices stay elevated, maybe around $60 to $100 for years and years to come. Inflation will be high, and the Federal Reserve, they can kiss goodbye to their 2% inflation target. And what does this mean? Interest rates come down as well, because demand destruction has to continue to prevent runaway inflation. Now that Russia has stopped supplying gas to Europe, and OPEC is not listening to the United States anymore, things will get rough for the West, and the whole world at large. Countries need to become energy independent or find a way to pay higher oil prices. And that means if America wants to dictate the price of oil, they need to do it in the physical markets. They have to unleash American energy and pump more oil. Trying to use interest rates to crush demand won't be as effective as before. OPEC will just cut production to keep prices high. So going forward, we are probably going to see a new oil order where countries with oil will be able to detect the terms and play with energy prices. They can choose to sell cheap oil to certain parts of the world, while others will be forced to buy energy at a higher price. And we know China has been buying cheap Russian oil and gas. India also has been enjoying deep discounts from Russia, so certain parts of the world will grow faster, while others will slow down. Now, I want us to imagine a world of 3 energy blocks, 3 factions that control oil production and exports to the world. That's going to be the NATO bloc, the OPEC bloc, and the Russian bloc. Now, the NATO bloc is basically oil-producing countries. They are allied with America. We are talking about US, Canada, and Norway. And the OPEC bloc is going to include Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and Qatar, and the Russian Blackwell is Russia. Now, I know this is highly simplified, but bear with this example. So all these 3 regions will be in charge of influencing the oil price. NATO was supplied to NATO countries. For example, 97% of Canada's oil already goes into the United States. And now Norway is more or less the exclusive energy supplier to the EU. And the Russian situation is very simple. They can only sell to China and the rest of Asia because of Western sanctions. So cheap oil in the East will likely stay in the East, and China can export it to the West, but at a high markup, like what they are doing the Russian gas now. OPEC will be very interesting. They will probably sell oil to everyone at a fair price, which they will control, of course. And let's think to ourselves, why can they dictate the price of oil? Well, because they produce 40 of the world's crude and they export 60 of oil products to the world. Now, OPEC has changed the game. They are now using the physical commodity itself, oil, to fight against interest rates and demand destruction. Because even if the Federal Reserve hikes rates all the way to 10, but OPEC cuts production down, the end result is still the same. The supply side controls the real economics of oil, and that's why we need to prepare for the globalized world. The era of cheap goods and low inflation has passed. All the stuff that we could buy for cheap prices is gone, and higher energy prices means everything is going to go up. Food prices will stay high, and commodity prices in general will stay elevated, and it's all because the world simply doesn't trust each other anymore. In fact, we are beginning to see friend showering happening. The US is looking to move towards French shoring, which means shifting their manufacturing and sourcing from the cheapest countries to only friendly allies. And according to Janet Yellen of the US Treasury, she said, "We favor the French shoring of supply chains to trusted countries so we can continue to securely extend market access and will lower the risk to our economy as well as to our trusted trade partners." And this means relying less on countries like China and Russia, and this means moving away from the reliance on Taiwanese-made computer chips because they are geographically close to China and they are shifting towards South Korea. And on paper, this sounds great, right? Security will go up, but so will prices. We'll see higher prices across the board. For example, America is imposing more technology restrictions on China to prevent its semiconductor industry from growing. They are trying to sanction Chinese technology. In other words, But China's already fighting back by developing its own cheap-making startups to become more self-sufficient, especially when it comes to technology. So while Chinese tech might get more expensive for many years to come, eventually they will crack the code, they will catch up and make chips in-house, and they'll start competing. Then America's course will start to go up again, and there's always a boomerang effect for every action. And the same thing is going to extend to oil and gas. And we have to be prepared for a future where oil prices are not going to come down by much. So here's the deal, guys. A lot of us, we are still living in the past where we expect ultra low interest rates to come back and inflation to drop below 2%. Well, it's not going to happen, guys. It's very unlikely. Geopolitics is getting worse. Oil producers are now looking out for themselves, and the Federal Reserve is only going to keep raising interest rates. They have no other tool. And that's why leverage is going to be very dangerous today. Now, if you have been borrowing money to make more money, you're in for rude awakening. There are going to be a lot more supply shocks, and the economy is not going to grow as fast as before your own strategy of pouring cash at 2 or 3% and then throwing it into the S&P for 10 a year. It's probably not going to work like before if there's another rise in oil prices and the economy slows down while interest rates spike up. Now, suddenly you are caught. Just imagine if you took out a loan in 2021 to buy stocks, your interest rate has probably tripled while your stocks are down 20 or even 30%. Now, you are victim of Wall Street, and that's why the best position to be in is to stack cash and stay liquid. If you're buying anything, buy it outright with cash. There's no point in borrowing money and getting into a mountain of debt. Your interest payments will just eat up your returns. Let's stay smart and don't let the system play you. And when demand destruction happens, coming with cash and snap up those assets. So let me know what you think. Is the world prepared for new oil order? Can the economy survive higher energy prices? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through this insane times.